All right, so I dropped off the notes guides at the end of each row. They should be coming towards you as we speak. If you need one, raise your hand and I will give one to you. I have plenty because I printed off them twice. I printed them this morning and I forgot I printed them 2 weeks ago. So there's plenty if you need one. All right, today we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson in the similar way that we talked about robber barons and captains of industry. There are many viewpoints on Andrew Jackson. I kind of foreshadowed it earlier in the week when I said some people think he's a great president, a powerful president, a really strong ruling president. Other people will say he's kind of crazy and he was eccentric and he was brutal and a warlord and he wanted to be king of America, which we talked about the fear of tyranny. What was that about when we talked about we were afraid to have a tyrant leader? Lauren, what was that about?
Having someone have absolute power over the
Exactly. They didn't want it to be a monarchy. They didn't want it to be one person too strong. Mallory, do you have a question or do you need one? Okay, I can get one for you right now. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Ethan. Just go use your right arrow and left arrow is probably the best way to do it. Journal one word. Write down one word that you would use to describe this person in this quote. At age 13, he joined the Patriots, but was captured by the British. When a British officer ordered the young prisoner to clean his boots, the boy refused. So he was captured. They said, hey, clean up your boots. And he said, no. He's resisting at age 13 a soldier. What one word would you describe someone like that as? Maggie? Determined. Stubborn. Independent. Patriotic. All right. Gutsy. Anyone else? Okay, all good, all good. That's going to give you a little bit of an example of age 13, what kind of character this person has. All right, Ethan, next slide, please. His background. Give us another arrow. He was born in a log cabin on the frontier. He grew up tough. He grew up in the wilderness, probably chopped down trees and logs. Like we watched that Westward video from History Channel, and that was Abraham Lincoln chopping wood. So Andrew Jackson kind of had a similar, very woodsy upbringing. So pretty tough, grew up in the cold, probably had to do a lot to help his family. Next. His parents were immigrants from Ireland. In the same way, similar again to Carnegie and Rockefeller, they both grew up with immigrant parents because we're in the early 1800s, so lots of the Americans there were first-generation children of America. Their parents came over and started their families here. Next. They died by the time he was 15. So picture this kid who was born in a log cabin on the frontier, growing up rough, rigid, hard, and without parents by 15. So you gotta grow up pretty fast when something like that happens. He grew up tough. Again, that's his home, an illustration that we have of it. And he was a military man as he grew up. Go again. He joined the American Revolution at age 13. That quote from him getting captured. So some of you, you're all 13, right? Some are older. So could you guys imagine being soldiers at the ages you are right now? Some of you nod. Next. In 1812, the Americans were fighting the Creek Indians, and he was the leader of the battle. In a way that during this time, like military leaders were of the highest regard, because we had to fight for so much to form our country. So if you were a good leader on the battlefield, you got a lot of respect from people around you. And that's seemed like a lot of our early politicians, like George Washington, they grew up through the military, and they were like, wow, he's a good leader, he should lead the country. I don't know if now we necessarily think of like the war leader is the same person as like the president. I don't know if anyone looks at Obama and thinks of him as like a war leader, although he's commander-in-chief. But back then, that's how Jackson came to power. Next. In the War of 1812, which is also starting the same year, he was in charge of the victory of the Battle of New Orleans, and we'll go into the details of the battles a lot more in the next week to come. But he also defeated the Seminole Indians in Florida in 1818 and helped regain the state of Florida for the United States. So over the course of 6 years, he has 3 really major battles. And now, here's where we start looking at the positive and negative. Positive, great, we won. He retains land for the United States. Negative, he's slaughtering Native Americans. I mean, just brutally. And we have to remember that at this time, they were there first, right? So we're actively moving them off their land violently, and he's leading the charge. A lot of people think he was really, I don't know if you want to use the word bigoted or racist. I don't know if those two apply, but he was very anti-Native American in his stance. So some people would say, well, it's just because he's trying to expand United States territory, and other people were like, no, he really had something against these people and their way of life. All right? Next. First known painting of Jackson, 1815. What kind of words could we use to describe this visual? How does he look? Anthony?
Young.
Looks young. He does look young. Even back then, when people look older from a younger age, he looks like a teenager probably, but a rough teenager, like someone who's been aged quickly. Lauren?
Sophisticated.
Sophisticated? What makes you say sophisticated?
He has like the little white thing on his neck.
Yeah. Sure, kind of formal clothes. Blake, will you turn off one light, please? Maggie?
He looks serious.
He does look serious. And if you look at like the $20 bill, he looks serious there, like almost all his pictures.
But also, like, painting took a long time.
True. So you're not going to smile for 10 days while they paint you. Sure. But he does look very stern and serious. Will, anything else?
He looks like he may have a lazy eye.
Like he may? Okay. Because that one's kind of looking straight at us, and this one's kind of over here. Maybe. That could be the painting. We'd have to look at some more maybe and see if that's a trend that continues. Okay, Ethan. His personal life. Let's learn more about him. And at the end of class, kind of like the last time we did a lecture like this, I'll ask you your opinion. What do you think of him? Okay. He studied law. This is on your guided notes. At North Carolina. And he practiced in Tennessee. So although he was a general, a guy who liked to fight, a guy who liked a good battle and strategy, he was a lawyer too. So here's the positive side that you could say he was educated. He practiced law. Realize I'm standing directly in your way. I'm trying to move out from one time to another. So he was a lawyer and a warrior. I think it's neat. Like back then, there were a lot of people who were like fighters, but also like fiercely educated because they had no distractions. Like they didn't go home and watch TV for 3 hours to unwind every night. It's like, you know, they wash up and then probably do something educational in the evening. Maybe it's one of the reasons why we admire the leaders because they got so much done during like shorter lifespans. Okay. He was involved with buying and selling real estate. So he sold homes, he bought homes, he flipped homes, which is funny. This lawyer, this fighting lawyer who also did real estate. Let's show you your first home. He married Rachel Robards, and we learned a little bit about his wife, right, when we watched the video yesterday about John Quincy Adams. Question, Rachel?
There's an extra.
Hold on to it for now. Thank you. Okay. Now, the next 3 lines on your guided notes are about his nicknames and how he earned them. You may get water. Let's hear the first nickname and how he got it. His first nickname is Old Hickory. Does that sound positive or negative?
Negative.
Let's see. Let's see what you think. Given to, hold on there for a second. You're okay. Given him by soldiers he commanded, it meant that he was a tough guy, tough as wood, on a hickory tree. So if your parents or grandparents ever told you stories about being disciplined by getting like whipped or switched with a switch or a stick, a lot of times it's like hickory, like that long, thin wood that would like scrape and scratch. Okay, so he was a tough guy, according to the soldiers that he commanded. Now we can go to the next one. Others called him King Jackson. Given to him by his political opponents, kind of labeling him in a negative way, intended to. Because some thought he was trying to take over the country. That he was trying to really be the forceful leader and be the one sole leader of the country. Yes, Anthony.
When did Washington die?
What year did Washington die?
Yeah.
Could not tell you off the top of my head.
Was it around this time?
He died, I think, before Jackson took office.
Okay.
We can double check that, though. I had never been great with date memorization. That's why very seldom do I ask you to remember a date. I'm trying to get the ideas across more than the dates. All right. And sharp knife. Given by Native Americans. All right. So not in the way of like, if I said Isabel's really sharp. I mean, she's always on it. She's very on task. This was given by his enemies in battle, so it doesn't mean the same thing, does it? Kind of the context matters here. The Native Americans say he was ruthless in dealing with them. Like he would promise things and go back on the promises. He would lie sometimes, cheat, steal. They did not find him to be a very savory or friendly character to them. Go ahead and get water, Rich. Any questions on those 3 nicknames? That's a picture of him shooting someone in a duel. Which you would think probably happened more than just this one occasion, because there's multiple illustrations of him with a gun, taking business in his own hands. He wasn't one of those hands-off like strategist dealers who's like sending troops in by paper, like in a war room on a desk. He's like out there, like doing it. All right, pretty physically active there. Let's talk about the election of 1824. One more, please. Doing a good job. Thank you for helping me here. This was a disputed election. All of his elections are disputed elections. We got a preview of that in the John Quincy Adams video. Next. He received the most popular votes, as we saw yesterday, but not a majority of the electoral votes, which at that time was all that counted.
So he won. So he got the popular vote in 1824.
In 1824. He went to Congress. The whole voting system went to Congress for a decision. They went to the House of Representatives and said, hey, what do we do here? This guy, Andrew Jackson, was ahead by 35,000 votes, but he didn't win the electoral vote. Congress decides that John Quincy Adams is president, not Andrew Jackson, which he's furious. And now that you know a little bit about him, being a war hero, brutal with Native Americans, a tough guy, and now really unhappy, you could imagine he's not really like the kind of unhappy to be like, Congress, I really think you should reconsider. No, he's going to take virulent action, very active opposition to John Quincy Adams, his whole president. Next step. A few issues existed that Jackson was angry about. He called it a corrupt bargain, as we saw in the 15 minutes yesterday. There was cheating and corruption and bribery too. So he's like, everything about this is wrong. Everything that happened once it went to the House of Representatives, I've been totally cheated here. The people want me by a margin of 35,000 votes. They want me president. But you've made some kind of deal here and like are giving each other positions, maybe money. There's bribery and corruption, and for some reason you picked John Quincy Adams. He's not happy about this. Next. Now we're looking at 1828. 4 years after, Jackson's completely like trying to ruin Quincy Adams' whole first term. Can't get anything done. Jackson's leading his whole popularity because he was a popular guy. Everything Quincy tries to do, he shuts it down. And now it's 4 years later. It's time for a rematch. His campaign was engineered by Martin Van Buren, who eventually tries to run for president as well. He wanted to recreate, you remember the Van Buren boys from Seinfeld, Emma? That's one of those funny things. It's like very obscure.
Secret sign.
They picked a very obscure thing to make jokes about there, which is great. He wanted to recreate the old Jeffersonian coalition. That's like a team or partnership of northern farmers and artisans. He wanted the common people. At least his perspective is the common people should rule. He was really tired of this corruption that he saw in the House of Representatives. He didn't trust the big officials. He thought they were cheating and being corrupt. So he wanted farmers and artisans, like craftspeople, the people that made clothing, people that made textiles. He thought they should be in charge of the country. Some people really liked him for that, because he was like the voice of the common person. Next. He also wanted Southern slave owners to be powerful, so he was a proponent of slavery. He thought slavery was okay because it helped people get their work done. Again, not the most like savory, maybe, not the most people-friendly person, maybe, but also believed in the common people. Next. And he wanted farmers to have small land holdings. So if it's a class of 34 and you're all farmers, he didn't want Jake to take over and be the Jake Schofield farming subsidy and everyone else is working for Jake. He thought that 34 people should be able to have a family whose farm was profitable, who could each make food that we all need, trade with each other, and have it be like a commonly held good. Everyone could have their piece of land. But Jake says no. Jake says, it's my time. Your time is up, my time is now. So this is what he wanted. He created the Democratic Party from the remains of Jefferson's old party, which was creating a national committee that oversaw local and state party units. But other than that, he wanted the people to really have power, the people to have votes, the people to have rights, the people to have farms, and then just a committee to oversee to make sure there's nothing really illegal going on and to oversee some corruption. He didn't want a big government. He didn't want big departments that were in charge of everything. He didn't want big regulations. So this is why some people really like Jackson, because he's like, yeah, let common people, let Reese do what she wants. Reese knows how to run her life. That's what he would say. He's like, don't give Reese 20 obligations that she has to meet. Let her figure out what's good for her. Some people really liked him. And he liked public parades and picnics and meetings of the public. So we could all get together as a class, talk about what's working in class, what's not, what can I change, what can I do better. He was really about getting people's voices involved. Again, the common people should have a voice. Danielle, question?
For the one that says 4 years later in 1828, Jackson easily defeated Milton Martin.
It's John Quincy Adams again. They had a rematch. Good question. So I'm sure he loved the chance to go up against Adams again and defeat him this time. That was probably a big like feather in his cap, like that retribution piece. Good question. Thank you for asking that. Let's move on.
There's actually another bullet point where he's talking about
What does it say?
a lot of political mudsliding on both sides.
All right. What does that mean? A lot of political mudsliding, Marcus.
It
Mudslinging.
means that both sides are just not doing very well and they're fighting against each other.
Yeah, they're throwing personal attacks at each other constantly. So Jackson isn't talking about John Quincy Adams as a politician. He's like, hey, he's corrupt. He's personally a bad person. He wants to ruin the nation. And on the vice versa side, remember they were going after Andrew Jackson's wife, saying she wasn't divorced. All these personal issues that had nothing to do with how they want to run the country. They're just throwing dirt at each other. Very dirty election. Thanks for pointing that out, Ethan. I'm glad we got a chance to go over that. All right, let's see what happened. This was the rematch. I've kind of summarized already, so we'll go through the next two. It was seen as the corrupt bargainer, John Quincy Adams, versus the military chieftain of Andrew Jackson. Jackson won easily and became president a few months later. And this is a sign or a graphic that shows you how the election was run. John Quincy Adams was more popular in what region, Leah?
Like
The East, and what section of the East particularly? Near Maine. Is there a term for that region, Reese? Where the colonies are up there? Where they used to be? New England. John Quincy Adams was really popular in New England. Where's Jackson popular, Campbell?
Like everywhere else.
Everywhere else. Pretty much.
up there too.
And what's going on down here that he was a big fan of, that not everyone up here was a fan of? Ethan? Slavery. Yeah, so anywhere where there's slave states, they're like, Jackson's our man. He's going to let us keep doing this. Maybe even do more of this, having slaves. So they were a big fan of the way he ran his country. And he was about the farmer, too. Remember how much farmland we have down here versus up here? There's some. Question, Nathan?
It looks like there's like so much more yellow than green, which is yellow Andrew Jackson.
Right.
And it looks like it's hard to believe that it's only 100,000 more. Is that this is a popular vote? It's hard to believe
Right.
that's only about 130,000 more.
Sure. So there's a couple of ways we could look at that. We could look at it one way.
'Cause it
Maybe
looks like-
people in the yellow
yeah.
states aren't coming out to vote as much. Because
Maybe
it appears,
maybe there aren't as many people.
I would suggest that you're also right, because remember down here's a lot of farmers.
Yeah.
So if you have 100 acres, then your next neighbor is 100 acres away, and 100 acres away, and 100 acres away.
Oh, that's true.
Versus like the more dense population of like even New York City in 1800 was starting to be like high rises
Yeah.
and like so you have lots of people in small areas.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it could also be some voter turnout issues.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this before we move on? Pretty clear though, Jackson was popular among the people, especially among the South and the inland states. Next. After the election, he fired, how am I doing on time? 9:05, we're good. Spoil system. After the election, he fired many government employees. Because remember, he didn't like government, right, Natalie? He was like, thought they were corrupt. So he gets into office, he's like, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. He got rid of like almost everybody. He shrunk the size of government by himself. Like, cut it more than half. He even fired, he fired a lot of the people that worked for John Quincy Adams' campaign. As soon as he like walked in, he served them papers and said, get out. So I'm sure he was probably pretty happy about it. He probably did it in a really joyful way. He hired many of his supporters, which I think a lot of presidents do. They get in, they bring their friends. Okay, next. The duties of all public officials are so plain and simple. In other words, you guys that have come before me have grown this and inflated this office and all of these staffers that you have here. What the government should do is simple. It should be common sense. We don't need 1,000 people to make all these decisions. And very few of his supporters, in turn, were qualified because he brought in Will and Pierce and Kiki and Mallory, whether or not they had any political training. It's like, no, they're good people. They'll make good decisions. So he's bringing in people that maybe aren't even very qualified, but he's sweeping lots of change is the point here. All out with the old and in with the new, and they were his new people. Any questions on that? Is that pretty clear? Thumbs up with me? Good. Next. That's the spoil system. Have you guys heard that phrase before? To the victor goes the spoils.
Yeah.
That means if you win, you decide what happens. You keep everything that's there to take, and you decide how it goes from there forward. So dealing with the bank, he hated the federal bank. Hated big bank, hated big government, hated big politics. So he was not quiet about it. Next. The bank is trying to kill me. Remember I told you he was afraid that the people of the banks were trying to actually murder him. But I will kill it. So some people think like around midterm, he starts getting a little loopy with the kinds of things. He's very paranoid. Maybe when you're in the battlefield, like killing lots of people, it changes your psyche somewhat, right? Today we think about things like that, like post-traumatic stress is a thing, right? We treat veterans, we treat people that come back from war. He is actually like looking over his shoulder and has people to be bodyguards because he's afraid he's gonna get assassinated by the bank and by supporters of John Quincy Adams wherever he goes. Okay, it begins to happen more and more. The quotes, there's books of his quotes with things like that. He felt the National Bank was only helping the rich, and issues dealing with farmers and merchants weren't getting addressed if they were issues of the small people in small towns. That the banks were only dealing with big business clients that could bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. Okay? He vetoed a renewal of the bank when it came up, and it ended the National Bank, and instead he formed all these smaller state institutions. Bless you. Bless you again. He was not a fan, to say the least, right? Next. This we're going to read about in more detail in the weeks to come, the Tariff of Abominations. This was a tax that helped manufacturers in the north and hurt southern planters. Is he going to be in favor of that, Catherine? In favor of helping the northern manufacturers? Or was he more a fan of the farmers?
Farmers.
Right. So southern states had to now pay more for European goods just because they were located in the south. So let's see, what kind of goods would come from Europe? Anyone think of anything today or then? We were kind of making cotton. What were the Europeans having that we didn't have yet, Jake? Tea. Because England had gone into China and Europe had gone into Asia. So lots of Asian goods, we weren't getting them directly. We were getting them through England. Very good. So things like that, if this is the northern side and Kenny's up in Maine, Kenny gets his tea pretty cheap and he's happy about it. They passed this tariff, or what he refers to as the Tariff of Abominations, because way over here when Wyatt wants tea, he's paying like $3, or the equivalent of $3, for the same tea that Kenny's getting for 50 cents, just because he's located way down in Georgia. I know, well, how is it your fault, right? Jackson's very upset at this. Thirsty? The states decided to nullify the federal law, meaning they were not going to follow the law. Which one did we get tested on? Which law did we get tested on that was a rebellion that they tried to nullify?
Aliens. That was the rescue. Or was the alien sedition?
It was the alien and sedition.
Boom.
Which two states? Bonus.
Kentucky and Virginia.
Kentucky and Virginia. Good. Or Virginia and Kentucky. Right, yeah.
See, that's what he said.
Next. A smaller tariff is put in its place. So they replaced the big tax with the smaller tax. Wyatt's still paying $1.50 for his tea. And he's in South Carolina. Let's have you be in South Carolina. You're not happy about it. And they talked about seceding, like leaving the nation because you can't get cheap imports. So there's a lot of battles between states' rights and federal rights during the time of Jackson. Next. Let me know if you need me to slow down at all. Are we going good? Again, we'll read about it more this week as well. Okay. Sure. Andrew Jackson, thank you, Ethan, thinks that this threat, this threat could lead to like the end of the country. again, he kind of hypes things up in terms of what he feels like is going to happen. He's always kind of afraid we're going to go to war again. And he's afraid that just over this tariff over the southern colonies, southern states, that we might go to war over it. Next. Can I have a volunteer to read this? Rachel.
Jackson on secession.
Mm-hmm.
If one drop of blood be shed there in defiance of the laws of the United States, I will hang the first man of them I can get my hands on to the first tree I can find.
So what does he mean, Danielle? What does he say? He will do to someone that doesn't follow the laws.
Hang the first man.
And that he will do it, right? So, what kind of a person makes a statement like that, Jack? Like,
A very violent person, very serious and angry.
yeah, he says if you shed one drop of blood, I'll hang you. I will. Like, could you imagine? This is our president of the United States, so it's a very different tone from a presidential office than we have now, right? You don't ever hear anything like that coming out of the White House.
Well, he just seems more like he seems like he doesn't care about the people because he's saying that like if his people of the United States are weak, he's gonna kill them. That's not how you want someone to like you. That's how you get them to hate you. And so he's not doing a very good job of being likable.
Yeah, it seems almost more of like a threat, right? Don't you dare.
He's becoming a Trump.
Okay, James, go ahead. Next. Here's another quote. Someone else to read? Emma?
If we get in a war over this, I will kill anyone responsible for starting the war.
So what do you think about that quote, Emma, since you read it?
Yeah, exactly. He's a very violent guy. He's really paranoid about war.
And it's a really different approach to have as a president to say things like that. Like, if anyone starts a war, I will kill you. If you cause somebody to lose a drop of blood over laws, I will hang you. It's like a movie or something. It's hard to believe this was like the way the country was run for the years that he was president. Next. All right, let's talk about Indian removal. Because this is the major, like, if you talk to anybody in high school of your teachers, they'll probably say the first thing about Jackson is how he treated the Native Americans. And try to figure out what his goal is as we go. We'll run through these a little quicker because we're going to read more about these. 1830, the Indian Removal Act. Gave people the authority to just sweep through, kick them off the land. Next. The Cherokee Nation versus Georgia came to the Supreme Court and said that we need to protect the domestic dependent nation, meaning that the natives can be removed wherever we find them if we need that land. Next, Worcester versus Georgia. We will review this in greater history next week. So these are just some of the cases the Supreme Court tries to rule on to try to see what direction the country is going to take. And we'll talk about that more later. So we can go to the next one. Here's some lines where he pushed Native Americans out. We learned about the Trail of Tears in that history video that we saw. So he moves the Cherokee off their land. He moves the Creek in those battles that he did off their land, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw. He's pushing all these Native Americans that have been there for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, and it's American land. So he's kicking them off and marching them at gunpoint with armies to be removed. Lots of people are dying on the trail because they're not feeding them. They're freezing to death. They're burying them in the ground in shallow graves on the way. Someone dropped dead. Okay, 5 minutes, bury them, let's go. Just marching thousands of people off of their territory that they've lived in for a long time. Okay? And is it faith as the common man? I think the projector was adjusted during the
Oh, yeah, Jackson's face.
Okay. So this is where we talked about both sides. Let's go back to people that did like him for being for the common man. Even though Maggie pointed out his quotes don't seem very positive for everybody. He distrusted the European establishment. He hated monopolies that would build up and take care of all the industry. So he was not a fan of what would become Rockefeller and Carnegie. He would think they're both criminals that are ruling and ruining the country. And he didn't like special privilege groups that would spend people to lobby for Washington for special laws. Really hated that stuff. His heart and soul was with the plain folk, the everyday people, believed that the common man was capable of uncommon achievements. That we don't need people to get special favors at the top. We can take care of ourselves. We can figure it out, right? We're supposed to be a nation based on the people. This is what Jackson believed in. Next. Here's the essential question that I'm going to ask you after I present one more slide. Was he the champion of the common man, or was he King Andrew? Which one is more appropriate? We'll go to the next slide. I'm going to ask you in just a second, so keep thinking about that. Why might you consider Jackson to be a strong-willed person? What evidence do you have that he was strong-willed, positive or negative? Maggie?
Well, probably he might be strong-willed because he had to grow up to be an adult.
Good. Good. He had to grow up to be an adult very fast, which requires a lot of willpower. Anthony?
He would kill even if it didn't, even if he didn't care if it affected anyone.
Sure. Strong-willed people, you can't be that kind of warrior without being strong-willed. Right? Character is a different thing, whether we think that's positive or negative, but he definitely believed in himself, that's for sure. Will?
After the first election, he didn't give up, and the second election.
He didn't give up. He didn't even really want to acknowledge that he had lost for a long time. How about some other people that haven't got involved? Kiki, why do you think he was a strong-willed person? What other evidence do we have?
Well, because he killed because he was strong. If he wasn't strong, he wouldn't be able to.
That's right. Very good. He was forceful. What was the craziest thing Jackson did that we discussed today? Annabelle?
He was like just a fight at the National Bank.
I agree. That stands out in my mind too. He thought the National Bank was going to assassinate him. Lauren, something else?
Reading the books of British soldiers.
Right. Jack?
I think when he says, if any of you start war, I'll kill you.
Yeah. Or if anyone sheds a drop of blood, I'll hang you. That's pretty crazy. That's not like presidential stuff that we think of today. Do you think Jackson had the characteristics of a good or a bad president? And explain your answers. Let's get some different people involved. Campbell, what do you think? We've talked a lot about him. What thoughts do you have?
I think he was good because he helped U.S. move forward. Progress.
I think in part you're right. Like, we would not have Florida. We would not have territories if he hadn't done that. But what about the way that he did that? Do you think it's justifiable?
It's bad, but if he wanted to make it back there, I feel like he had to do that.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your reasoning. Angelica?
He was good because he got them like a lot of land, but he's bad because he like had to kill people for it to get them.
Okay. So you think it's conflicting?
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's hard to look at it one way or the other. Remember, I've talked in other classes. Like, I very rarely do I think anything is one-dimensional. Good. I'd like to get a couple other people who haven't spoken yet. Sam, what do you feel?
I feel like he has the characteristics here. I feel like he was mostly good.
Mostly good.
He did help America move forward, even though he was also kind of bad. He killed a lot of people. And it was
Okay. In some respects, I feel like he would have hated... I only have 10s. Darn. I should have had a 20 for the lesson. I feel like he would have hated having his face on the 20 since he hated the National Bank so much. And he was afraid that they were going to kill him. I don't think he would have wanted to be on our bills. Well,
I think he was a good president because he scared some of the people that could have caused a rebellion by saying, I will personally kill you.
yeah, it might have helped actually keep people in line. And Jackson?
Well, I did a report on him in 3rd grade, and one of the reasons he was so paranoid about being assassinated is because in the beginning of his first term, there was an intent to assassinate him, but the guy's gun didn't go off. So
wow. So he had some evidence there. It's not like he was just making this up in his mind. Thank you. Danielle?
I didn't get the last two.
Okay, we'll touch back on him in a couple of minutes. Next, homework assignment's a short one. Create a small political cartoon dealing with Andrew Jackson or one event in his life. You choose. You can look up something online if you want. It could be one frame if you want, or it could be 3 or 4 frames like a comic. And then we'll do it Monday. You have 5 minutes to get started. And thank you for that. Any other questions before we get started on that, Rachel?
Can you just draw it on the back of our
You may.
paper?
That could be fine. James? If you want to look up more information about him online to address, that's fine.